Thanks, Naveen, for joining me today for this episode on digitalization of supply chain. Before we proceed further, if you can share about yourself and introduce for our audience, it would be very helpful, and we can proceed accordingly. Yeah.
Thanks, Maninder, for this opportunity to speak to you and through your podcast with everyone around who will be watching this, right? So I am Naveen Tiwari, born and brought up across India. So my father was in defense, so I have traveled across, but that's why I can't pinpoint and say I am from Delhi or I am from Lucknow. So that's the difficult part. But yeah, so born into an Air Force family, so some kind of discipline brings discipline into your life. But yeah, I am a mechanical engineer and a MBA in supply chain and operations from IIM Mumbai. And I've worked across the park in supply chain. So I started my career with Tata Motors after engineering in procurement. Did we bit about 4 years there in procurement and then went to NITI or IIM Mumbai as it is called now and started my FMCG journey first with ITC, very short period, about 1.5 years, but therein started my FMCG and planning career. So I've worked about 7 to 8 years in planning across ITC, SC Johnson, and now Pepsi. But yeah, more than planning, 7 years in planning, I've also started to work in as in Pepsi, we call it the move space or the transportation and warehousing. So for past 2, 3 years, I've been working in digitization, the transportation and warehousing operations in PepsiCo. So
Okay.
that's a bit on the professional side. On the personal side, I'm a avid reader, so I've read a lot of books.
Mm.
Just a fun fact, right? In 2020, when everyone was locked down, I had read 52 books in a year.
Oh, nice.
So that was the challenge that I took, and hopefully I succeeded. And I'm also an photography enthusiast, so try to get that hobby running, although it's very difficult currently with all the work around. Yeah, so that's a way about me. I'm married. I have two children as of now, and my wife also works in a similar area as ours.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
thank
Thanks a
you.
lot, Naveen. Thanks. And I think we will take lots of information from your past experience and what currently you are doing. And thanks for sharing that. So, the key thing, like what does digitalization in supply chain mean and why it is important to start with for understanding the context also. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So when I started my PepsiCo career, that was about 7 years exactly, almost exactly 7 years back in 2018. I started my career with PepsiCo, and that was my induction into the digitalization of supply chain. Before that, I was an operations guy doing planning or procuring material, but in PepsiCo, I started the digitalization.
Mm.
The first thing that I am sure our viewers would be aware of, but it's very important to be clear is what is the difference between digitization and digitalization,
Right,
right?
right,
So, although many people use it even I used to use it very interchangeably,
right,
but digitization is all about converting something which is analog into a digital, right? So you can digitize your land record, which is a very important project going on with the government. But digitalization is not just technology, it is technology enabling the process along with people. So we have to understand that we should start using digitalization more as the operating word when we talk about supply chain digitalization specifically.
right.
Now, I think the moot question is why it is important, right? Why do we need digitalization? We have been operating like this for almost 150 plus year, and things were working well. But yeah, why it is required? Because if we look at the change of world that happened in March 2020 when Corona hit everyone, right? It was all about agility, how fast we could respond to the disruptions and how well we can cope up with those disruptions without really diminishing the stakeholder value. Now,
Correct.
this is where I have seen in my personal experience the supply chain which were digitalized, which had some form of the other in across, right? Maybe it's planning, maybe it's logistics, warehousing, transportation. Anywhere, wherever there was a buffer of digitalization, they were able to quickly pivot,
Okay.
do scenario based planning and take decision which was not easy for a supply chain which was working more on excel sheet or pen and paper, whatever the other format is. So why digitalization is important? First thing is it gives you visibility. Now, I'm a firm believer in current world, visibility is the currency which you can cash in. If you know your supply chain on a dashboard, then you're the most rich people in that particular supply chain because you can take decision basis the visibility.
Correct.
So digitalization is essentially creating that visibility which was not there. Remember, maybe I'll remember my times in Tata Motors, right? When we used to find out where is the product, we
Hmm.
used to call up the person who was in the dispatch room that where is the truck.
Hmm.
Now we are currently working on a big project which I'll talk about in some time, right? It's called the transportation control tower. So now we know where our products are, on which street, and what would be the computed ETA at the destination. So
Hmm.
we have come from a phone call to real-time tracking, and that's what digitalization is helping us around. So it's important to digitalize just to gain visibility, but also it helps you take effective decision, which is a very key focus area now in nowadays, right, for the supply chain offices
Correct.
across the industry. Yeah.
Correct. And yes, I think visibility, the word you mentioned, I think lots of people will relate to it because taking decision basis, knowing what we are doing, the data, then interpreting that data and using that to understand what is happening becomes very important. And digitalization comes at the core center of everything. So yes, I totally agree to that part. And what you just mentioned that you will cover few projects, I think maybe we can touch base that which will build the context as well. So what key projects you have done or you have been part of or currently involved, if you can share with us where digitalization is like the key thing or theme being followed. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me start. So I am planning to cover two main projects or
Okay.
digitalization initiative that I have done with my great partners across the IT teams and across the businesses. Let's talk about transportation control tower, right? Which is what we have recently implemented in one of our countries in PepsiCo. Now, if you imagine a control tower, it gives us vibes of NASA, right? The
Okay.
NASA control center where you can see on big screens where each part of the process is there, what is the metrics there. So there would be some key metrics popping up on the screen, etc., right? So transportation control tower or control tower in general is also something of a nerve center where you can see the movement of various products across the value chain. Now, I'm going to specifically talk about transportation control tower, which deals with the physical movement of the products.
Okay.
Now, the way we classify our transportation value chain in PepsiCo is there is an inbound, which is basically the raw material, right? Raw and packaging material. Then you convert that into a finished good. You're transporting it for the first mile, which is basically between plant to your plant warehouses or the bigger distribution center, right? Mother warehouse. There are a lot many names that keeps floating around in supply chain. And then you do the middle mile transportation, which is from that particular mother warehouse, you send it to a distribution center, and then you do the last mile where you reach your retailers or your direct distributors or those big modern trade customers. And that's typically under sales, usually in FMCG, but sometimes even supply chains are handling that last mile distribution. And then you have the last leg, which is the returns, right? So inbound, first mile, middle mile, last mile, and the returns.
Right.
Now, the idea of transportation control tower is to have a visibility on the flow of product across these all legs of the
Mm.
value chain that you have, whether it's inbound, whether it's last mile, or even returns. Now, transportation control tower is essentially a enhanced visibility platform which lets us take decision basis exception.
Okay.
So what we have done in this particular project is we have involved one of the key leaders in industry from a visibility perspective, and then what we have done is we have set up command centers or control rooms or control towers in few of the location that we operate, which are essentially doing four key steps in the whole process. So
Okay.
it's not just about having visibility of where your truck is, right? It starts from the planning of the load. How do you create your truck? How do you efficiently identify the carriers? Which is the low cost carrier? All of that is the planning, the transportation planning part. That's also enabled through digitalization.
Okay.
After that, after you have planned the load, then you hand it over to your warehousing counterparts, right? Where they fill the truck, move it across. That's where the execution part or the visibility part comes in. So, right from the time a carrier is accepting an indent that, yes,
Okay.
I will provide you a truck until it reaches your sorry, it reaches your origins gate, right?
Hmm.
It is loaded, it is dispatched, it reaches your destination, it is offloaded, and the trip is completed. All of those milestones, as we call it, are being tracked on the digital network, right?
Okay.
So if it's as simple as that, if we go on to one network and search by a particular trip or a load, you will see at what part of the transportation life cycle it is.
Okay.
Now, this is a good thing to have, right? You know where your truck is, but it doesn't give you any decision making.
Hmm.
So what this transportation control tower is enabling you is that it is actually telling you this was the planned time at what the truck should have reported, truck should have been loaded,
Right.
dispatched, etc., etc. And this is the actual. Now,
Okay.
this is where the intelligence lies in, right? If
Right.
and you can configure the business rule. If I am late by 2 hours for my pickup, then it flashes on a control tower, and the person responsible then follow ups with the carrier or the transporters. So this is a key enabler where it is also helping us drive efficiency, reducing dwell time. Our truck utilization are expected to go high. The good thing is customer service, right? We are able to deliver more on time. So
Okay.
that on time element is increasing. Sustainability is also positively impacted by this because now your trucks are running efficiently. They are
Right.
not waiting for loading, so they're not burning fuels. Transportation planning ensures that the right transportation route is taken. So your kilometers travels are decreasing, so your greenhouse emissions are going down. So multiple positive impact. But that's not where transportation control tower is stopping. It's
Hmm.
not about planning. It's not just about execution. There has to be a feedback loop, right? So
Hmm.
there is another element of how do you analyze these particular things to improve continuously.
Okay.
Now, what is being done is by the team is they continuously keep analyzing what have been our performance. There are dashboard, there are KPIs. Again, everything on the network itself in form of dashboarding, which helps them improve continuously. So
Okay.
that's also a feedback loop. So, like, did we choose the right carrier? If yes, good. How do we, continue sustaining that carrier choice? Did we not choose a carrier? Okay, no. Why did we not choose a carrier? Because it was not available. Now,
Okay.
what? So remember the five whys we do. So we
Right.
understand where the gap is and how do we improve. So all in all, a transportation control tower is impacting the supply chain very positively, and we are hoping to roll it out into the other markets as well. And by market, I mean other geographies as well. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm sure. So you have explained it in a way that everyone can understand, but I'm sure that behind implementing the project, it must have been a lots of painful activities like integrating the systems, onboarding people, because it involves change also. So lots of people who are not comfortable with digital things, they are used to manual processes and everything. We will not go deep into this part because there will
Yeah.
be like endless discussion around it. But just for the audience, that it's not that easy to implement how Naveen has explained it in a way for this project. And I think you were mentioning about one more project. I think after
Yeah.
completing.
So another big project, Maninder, that we had done is in planning domain. So we had implemented planning system across, I think now in 11 countries.
Okay.
Now it involved not just an technical upgrade, right? Like you're upgrading from an Excel to something like a macro, but
Okay.
it was a full-scale implementation project which helped us forecast efficiently, which helped us plan our supplies very well, which helped us plan our replenishment effectively and do our inventory management. So it was actually spanning across both demand and supply. And I was fortunate enough to be part of this implementation. So it was about 4 years of project that we did right across geographies like India, China,
Right.
Thailand, Australia, New Zealand. So there were many countries where we implemented this. Now, why this is very important, right? It's not about a technology implementation.
Okay.
Anyways, that's the easier part, right? But we have to focus on the process part also because with digitalization, there come standard ways of working.
Right.
Now, without standard processes, you cannot really sustain a digital product because when it comes to sustain after implementation, when you have to sustain, if you have a product which is very bespoke to a market,
Hmm.
the sustain cost skyrockets because then you will have to have specialists looking after the sustain strategy
Right.
because it will be very specific for that market. So what we did during this process is we created a template which we call the planning template, which is the backbone side, right? So that's how the planning across these 11 countries needs to be done. It will be enabled by technology, but these are non-negotiables that you have to do.
Okay.
Now, obviously, you would have certain ways of working in market that was also enabled, but we have tried to keep the deviations from the template to the minimum.
Got it.
Now, this is very important because what it has done us is to do a benchmarking.
Hmm.
Now we can easily compare a forecasting of an India versus forecasting of New Zealand, let's say, right? Or so it helps you benchmark. It also helps you improve and cross learn also because your templates are same, your technology is same. So this was a very big project, so almost running into 4 years, spanned across the geography. So, but it was a good learning project. Yeah.
Right. And it is already implemented and now it is being used.
Yeah, so we are in the eighth year of sustain for the
Okay.
first market, India. So it's already a grown-up baby as of now.
Almost a decade, almost reaching a decade now. And
Yeah,
for example, I know that a baseline is different for different companies. Generally, talking about FMCG sectors, not naming any company, but like the big companies who are driving the FMCG growth. So, for such big companies, when the technology is being implemented or the data is digitalized to get benefits, so the improvements are generally in the double digit percentage wise, or it's mostly in the single digit percentage wise. Very generic questions, but generally asking.
yeah. No, I think it is very specific to an industry, very
Okay.
specific to a company, and also specific to a KPI, right? So
Okay.
because it depends upon at what maturity stage that company is for that particular KPI. I'll take a very simple example like fill rates, right?
Hmm.
Now, fill rates typically in a country like India, where we
Okay.
have 90% more in traditional trade, you
Okay.
would see typically us handing over the supply chains, handing over their stock sheet to the distributors, and then they are ordering whatever is available. So the
Okay.
fill rates are almost 90 plus, right?
Hmm.
But when you start to analyze and implement digitalization project, you might see 1 or 2% uptick in this particular KPI because the baselining itself has to be recomputed, right? It's not a pristine order. So
Hmm.
while there is no one answer to this particular question, but it depends upon how your baseline is, how
Got
mature your processes are, and what is the scope, what is the impact of that particular project. Now, there are some digitalization projects which do not really impact directly any financials, right?
it.
They
Okay.
will not bring you any productivity, but it can be on the process side. They give you standardized process which are scalable. And if you remember, and we have been reading about, right, the whole world is going into global capability centers.
Hmm.
Now, as a process, right, global capability centers can only give you productivity or efficiency if the processes are standardized. Now, processes can be standardized if it is more or less a technology driven process, which is person agnostic. If you do it or if I do it, it should be the same. So
Right.
that's where digitalization is there. So no one answer, but yeah,
Correct.
it depends upon the state of maturity of that
Yeah.
KPI, industry, and the company.
I agree. I agree 100%. But I will pick from here. So generally, what happens? How companies select, plan, and then decide how to execute the projects? like how this whole thing works across the sector or in the
Yeah.
company.
So I think if the first step that you talked about, right, selection is very key. Now, if we talk about in very simple term, right, the why of the project has to be very sound.
Hmm.
Why are you doing this? That's the selection process. What and how can be defined later, but if your foundational why is not there, it is not embedded into the leadership and also the person who has to run it, it will fall out. And I've seen those projects which started with a very weak why, where the teams were focusing on how and when and what, they had faltered because then it got implemented, but it never gave you the productivity or the efficiency it was. So,
Okay.
how do you select? You have to define the why, and that's where it has to neatly dovetail into your supply chain strategy and
Okay.
into your corporate strategy also, right? So,
Hmm.
for example, if your supply chain strategy says you have to increase visibility, so that's where I think I can say transportation control tower comes into, right? That why is very clear because as a supply chain and as a corporate, we want to increase the visibility, enhance customer service. Now, how do you select? So you know the answer to why, that I need to increase the visibility. But how do you select is something you have to align with the strategic goals. And then you also have to prioritize well. There will be you can say competing goals, and
Okay.
everything needs money, right, in this world, and the money is limited. So you have to prioritize well that this should be the phase one of the project, this should be phase two of the project. So selecting what needs to be done is dependent on why it is needed. So
Hmm.
you have to define the why very well.
Okay.
Align your stakeholders well also, right? Because stakeholder alignment, that's in the execution state of the project. Because having a clear understanding with the stakeholders early on, onboarding the team, forming a governance strategy, forming a team is very important because everyone has to be clear on the roles and responsibility. So that's where you plan well, right? So you
Okay.
have to define the project phases, you have to define the governance, you have to define who is responsible, what is his clear role and responsibility. And you have to map your technologies also in this particular stage. So while planning for a project, if you leave the loopholes open on the technology front, you will definitely see a cost creep in the later part of the project because sometime during the discussion, someone will sprang up and say, oh, we left WMS out. Now, to
Okay.
integrate WMS into another project is creating an interface which costs you X amount of dollars more. So you have to map your technology very well, make it watertight, that
Okay.
technology strategy as well. And also, I think as a human being, right, we always get excited, and you would have seen in your company as well. When we start to discuss the things, everyone has ideas, right? And therein starts the scope creep.
Hmm.
And this is a pertinent problem everywhere that you start with something in mind and then everyone starts to keep adding their ideas and this results in scope creep. So you have to ferociously guard your scope because that was aligned in the initial stage where you decided the why,
Hmm.
right? In the what and the how, you should not let the scopes creep until unless it's genuinely making sense that we
Right.
overlooked in the why phase. Now,
Right.
the last part is executing flawlessly. Now, this is typical project management where you start with a robust business requirement,
Right.
where you understand that business very clearly, document it well. Documentation is very important, and it has to be very soundproof that this is what we had aligned during the business requirement phase. Then you go building the prototype. Now, I think I have seen across supply chain the strategy of using the agile methodology for being followed everywhere. I think if I talk about 10 years back, we used to spend a lot of time developing and very less time in implementing because we wanted to be 100% sure. But
Hmm.
now it's all about developing, implementing, learning, and again developing back, right? That minimum viable product methodology that we. So that is to be there. You pilot, you stabilize, you scale up. And how
Okay.
do you do that is through a robust governance mechanism. You have to have uh, regular check-ins with the stakeholders so that everyone is aligned and focused on what needs to be delivered. And also the timeline governance has to be very well there, because timeline is key in nowadays for supply chain. And
Correct.
I think after you have implemented, the key problem that digitalization projects are currently facing is sustaining them.
Right.
Because let's be very clear, right? When a project is being implemented, the CEO even asks for that project. But when once it is implemented and it's in a sustain, no one asks about it apart from the departmental head. So
Right.
that is where the sustain strategy has to be very clear. Your skill building has to be up to date. You have to do regular audits or process health check to ensure that it remains on track. And this is where I think companies are falling behind, having a robust sustain strategy, and they should focus on.
Okay. Okay. Great. Um, So actually, so you explained about select, plan, and execute part with multiple phases which are involved in any digitalization project. So you specifically focused on aligning the stakeholders, like which is I think one of the key things to execute any project. So considering the stakeholders, then the kind of tools or technologies we have to use or then the overall scenario in terms of how this key project will solve a bigger picture for the organization. I think every stage has a certain kind of challenge. So, if you have to share general challenges which you must have faced or the teams must have faced, or generally people should expect they might face during the project implementation. So what would those challenges would be?
Yeah, I think, yeah, if every project, be it digitalization or anything, right, has its own challenges. They can vary in the means and forms they appear. But in my experience, one of the biggest challenge that everyone, and especially companies who are just starting their journey in digitalization, overlook is the people part. So
Okay.
usually we are obsessed about technology, or we are implementing state of the art technology. We tend to somehow, give focus on the processes also, but people are left to the last discussion, right? Who will be doing that work? How he will be doing that work? Are we enabling him correctly with the proper tools? Are we giving him the right, processes, etc., etc.? That's where company do give little less focus than the other things, and that's where the change management is very tricky, and it is one of the biggest hurdle in a success of project. Now
Okay.
when you're forming, if you remember when we talked about planning,
Hmm.
the second step of any project, while planning the governance structure, you should be very clear on having a person specifically
o-
for change management. It shouldn't be a side hustle for someone like a project manager. So
Okay.
you have to have a dedicated resource for change management,
Hmm.
and you have to foster a culture of change, right? It shouldn't be like that this is something which is top driven, and the people continue to think that they can do whatever they are doing and just show to the leadership that this is being done in a
Okay.
certain way. So the change has to be down to the gray matter, right? So you need that change management to be very critical. And I have seen projects failing and also succeeding because the change management was up to the mark or not up to the mark. So change management, one of the biggest obstacles,
Okay.
if not addressed properly. Now,
Okay.
the second most important is data. And we keep talking about data everywhere, big data, AI, ML. But as the old proverb still stands in, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
Hmm.
Now, any data can be garbage. It's just the way of looking at, refining it, and then feeding it into any system. Now, teams, and because data is sometimes very cross-functional. So
Hmm.
let's take an example of a life cycle of a transport load, right? It follows transportation, it follows warehousing,
Hmm.
then it is with carrier, then it is with the destination. So it is across function. Now, understanding the nuances of how this data needs to be interpreted and
Hmm.
fed into the system is very critical. So, you have to have in a digitalization project someone specifically looking at data who
Okay.
is a data expert but also understands the interlinkages of functions. So
Okay.
uh, that's another challenge which can be solved by having someone specific for data, and it is a key.
Okay.
Now, the third thing that we should talk about is again linking back to the first point, change management, is the capability building.
Okay.
Now, typically, when we run projects in our organization, we kind of give it to someone who is already doing something like that. So, for example, if you're trying to do a planning project, you say, okay, this is a supply planning project. So, the supply planning team will continue to do it without the due diligence on mapping of the capability. Is
Okay.
that person, so he may be a great Excel planner, right? But does he understand the safety stock formula that is there in the textbook? He might not be, because he might not be educated enough on supply chain management because of his whatever past experience are there. Now if you're trying to implement something which is very scientific in inventory management, then he may not be the right person. He may be right for some other thing, right? So that capability building and competency mapping is another big challenge
Okay.
that the organization should refer to. And I think what we talked about initially is the scope, right? One of the biggest challenge is scope creep, and that results in cost creep in the project. That has to be fiercely guarded by the project management, and there should be due approval mechanisms set in the plan phase of the project, which is the governance structure. So this is the aligned business requirement. If there is anything additional plus and minuses, that has to follow a approval mechanism. So
Okay.
if we turn these kind of issues into opportunity by proper addressal system, they can work in our favor during any project.
Got it. But what do you think about the current scenario? Because I think across the sectors currently, it was published recently also that it was asked to the CEOs that which is the key focus area for them in current year or maybe next year also. So cost was one of the key points. And we know that for any kind of project implementation, even though we want the benefits to come to the organization, but when it comes to, for example, capability, resource allocation, and selection of the right technologies also, um, when the cost is involved, it becomes very difficult to get the funding also. So it is expected from the teams to become agile as well in that part. But expectation is gold, but we don't want to put money for the gold. So is it still it is there, I know, but it would be helpful if you can share your context on this part as well.
Yeah, definitely cost pressures are there, especially since I think 2022,
Mm.
since the wars have started, right? The supply chains are under immense pressure, and the stakeholders are asking for more value from each of the company. And every penny, every dollars being invested is highly scrutinized, and there is a due approval mechanism in almost all of the companies. And I understand that capability building does involve hiring skilled resources that may involve some kind of a additional cost increment. Now, this is something where the company should take a step back and understand and try to dovetail the whys of a particular project
Mm.
into the strategy that they have. May it be the supply chain strategy, it can be as granular as a transportation strategy, right? That dovetails into your logistics strategy, into supply chain, into corporate strategy. So that why has to be very clear. And if during the why phase of that project, where you plan for that particular project, you're able to quantify the positive impact on the returns, which is the dollars efficiency, right? Then there is a very high buy-in. Now the problem comes in a project like planning, right? An improvement of 1% in forecast accuracy is definitely having a direct impact on your customer satisfaction.
Mm.
But is it increasing your revenue? That might not come within 1 week of or 1 month of implementing a planning, digitized planning project, right? It may come in years because there are certain other factors,
Correct.
but it does help you, if not quantify objectively, but subjectively increases the competence of supply chain. So it's a fine thread,
Mm.
right? It's a fine balance to be struck between the cost and the benefit.
Mm.
Sometimes it's not the cost benefit that comes in, but the process benefit that can come in. You may become a preferred employer, right? Because your supply chain is one of the best. Gartner's every year releases a
Right.
list of top supply chain, right? So you become a talent attractor, and
Right.
that's where you can use digitalization project to be that particular attractor. So yeah, it's difficult answer to a
Correct.
much difficult question,
Correct.
but I think the supply chain officers are still trying to figure out between cost and benefit, and it's going to be more difficult in coming phases because we have seen the world has become more VUCA as
Right.
we are speaking, right? Yeah.
Right. Right. We are just moving to the last section of our discussion. One,
Yeah.
um, so you primarily shared two examples, and then you shared the context using different examples. So currently, like what you mentioned about VUCA world we are in currently. So what kind of digitalization generally companies are focusing on? One I understand from you is that the visibility increase is like the key theme, how we can do that and then use that to take decisions. So in this planning part, you have already shared two examples, logistics also one you shared. Generally, what kind of digital projects companies are currently focusing? We don't have to go into deep, but yeah, maybe the theme of the projects.
Yeah, I think the biggest theme that companies are trying to solve with digitalization is how to be more agile in this world.
Okay,
So agility comes with faster decision making, right? We may not be right, so we don't have to spend a lot of time in understanding and evaluating the causal factors before we take the decision, right? We may take a decision, be slightly off the track, and then course correct.
okay.
With 2020 and with a lot of things happening across, I think most of the supply chain officers are now trying to be more agile rather than being more scientific and 100% correct.
Okay.
Let's be honest, we are not running a space mission, right? We can be wrong in shipping a
Right.
product, shipping a case of a particular product, right? So what supply chains are trying to solve with digitalization is how it gives you better decision making ability and how it makes you more agile. Now, if you remember in starting, I talked about that visibility is the currency that companies should cash in, right?
Right.
Now, visibility can be in a very simple term, where is my truck? That can be a visibility,
Mm.
but it can also be a visibility of the possible scenarios that I can model in,
Right.
let's say, in a planning system, right? Now, if my supplier breakdowns in X location, do I source it from Y location? What would be the cost? And I'll take a very interesting example, right? Sustainability is the keyword everywhere.
Right.
And every company is trying to do packaging innovation to reduce their carbon footprint. Now, with digitalization, there can be there can be a opportunity where we model a scenario, and
Hmm.
let's move on from a particular A product
Hmm.
of packaging
Right.
to B product, which reduces the GHG footprint. But
Okay.
we don't have to run it physically. We don't have to fill our truck. We don't have to create that particular packaging material. We don't have to fill our truck. We don't have to transport our truck. We can do it on the digital twin.
Right.
So that gives you scenarios and that gives you decision making. So even without putting dollars into making that particular packaging material, making that finished good, you can simply use a digital twin to arrive at a decision whether it's a favorable or a non-favorable one. So over the years, the benefit of digitalization of your supply chain would be in better decision making, which is making you more agile. So I think that's what supply chain officials should start thinking, and they are already thinking on that part.
Right. 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 And I agree. Actually, during my interactions with the multiple people from the industry, I think I have been hearing more about this, and in fact, agility. I will totally agree to this. Like everywhere, this is being requested or asked by the leadership to follow. The last part primarily now. So I think I will touch base the people part because I have been part of few projects where I have personally seen this as a big challenge coming into picture. So I know that sometimes it is highlighted that mindset change is required for certain things. And then sometimes it's more about skills where capability building also you mentioned. So if we have to give an understanding to someone who is watching this video that how if that person is becoming a part of any project or if that person has to become a part of any project, how he or she can add value, what will help them personally or professionally also by supporting the project, and what kind of skills they can learn which can overall help the journey. So
Yeah,
if you can share your thoughts around it. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. So as we talk about people, right?
Mm,
In the three pillars of any initiative, right? People, process, and technology. I think one of the most overlooked pillar is people. But as we speak, organizations are becoming aware that this is one of the critical pillars of any initiative. Now let's understand, right? It's a human behavior,
mm,
and there is a very simple question in English, right? What's in it for me?
yeah.
If you have the answer for that questions at an organizational level, at a department level, downright to an individual level, right? Then that project would be success. Now
Mm,
let me give you an example. If you're trying to do a transportation or a warehousing project, right? You have to make the change management so robust that downright to the warehouse executive who is filling the truck with boxes, he
mm,
should be aware, okay, this digitalization project, which is let's say a WMS implementation, right, is going to make my job easier.
mm,
Is going to tell me where to pick from efficiently so that I don't have to look around the shelves, etc., etc. So if he is clear on what's in it for him, then he would be very much glued to the project initiative and he will ensure that it is a success.
mm,
So definitely you have to make people understand what's their responsibility and how do they positively impact the particular project. Now, this is something where you get the buy-in, right?
right.
But you sometimes will find people not in the right spot. Now, when I say right spot, if you continue to do the things that you have been doing the way you have been doing, you will not progress. Then it's not a transformation, right? It's sustenance. Now,
Mm,
with digitalization, you expect some kind of transformation. Now, you need to take a step back and understand, again, dovetailing it back to the competency mapping that we talked about. Is your is your person or is your executive rightly mapped to this particular competency? And there are various frameworks that can help you build those competency frameworks. There can be competency building programs also.
mm,
You can have your training programs. Maybe the person is not right there in the maturity stage of 3, let's say, but
mm,
he is on 2. All he needs is a 10-hour training on warehousing that propels him to the stage 3 of maturity, and then he can perform this particular thing. So
mm.
competency mapping and capability building initiatives are important. Now,
Okay.
that's how you progress the journey. Obviously, you have to enable your people with right processes. Now, those processes can only be formulated by subject experts and
Mm,
they have to be stress tested, right? So, if you have, let's say, a forecasting process,
mm,
now what is the granularity of data? What is the forecasting lag? How many weeks of data should you consider? All of this is what you have to define in process. Now, once this is test tested, it's ready to be proven, you can hand it over to a capable person whom you just mapped in competency. He might be at stage 3, then he can take it forward and sustain and improve in coming
mm.
future, right? So that's how you progress on the people agenda.
Right. Right. And anything specific you want to share with the supply chain professionals, that what kind of skills will help them to become a better contributor? Because what I can understand is it's more about program management, change management, and understanding the things. So, any specific skills you want to call out so that people know that, because at some point of time, every chain professional has to go through something in terms of project or something, right? So,
Yeah.
any specific skill you want to call out?
Yeah, I think one thing is for sure what we have learned during our formal education needs to be augmented almost daily or weekly or monthly, right? So it's not like if, for example, let's take my example, right? If I have done about a decade back my MBA in supply chain, I have learned everything about supply chain. No. So there has to be continual enhancement of your skills. And I'm a firm believer that if your current job does not have a flavor of technology, then you're in the wrong job. You might get eliminated. Your job may get eliminated in the future. So you have to think about what are the skills that you should incorporate. And for supply chain professional, depending upon your area of interest, you can go more deep, become a subject matter expert, for example, in forecasting, which may require you to be good in mathematics,
Mm,
good in statistical mathematics. Definitely, you may have to learn some programming languages where you can model it easily, and then optimization. I think in supply chain we are doing a lot of optimization, be it forecasting, be it transportation optimization, route planning, etc., etc. Now there are various ways to do optimization. There are linear programming optimization, there are mixed integer programming. So having an understanding of how the mathematical subsets of supply chain are working is good to have. And
okay,
then you have to have the digital skills as well. Can
okay,
you code? Now, it's very easy nowadays to code in open programming languages using the help of Google. Now we have Chat GPT and etc. etc. helping us out. So you have to augment, and definitely as a supply chain professional, you should be a subject matter expert in at least one or two sub areas of supply chain, and you
okay.
should definitely strive to have knowledge about all the other functions as well.
Got it. Got it. No, no, I totally agree with you on that part. I think it's very important to learn, keep learning actually, in simple manner. And we have lots of resources and lots of people to talk about who are experts in a certain field. And I think very well covered on that part. And thanks a lot, Naveen. I think I'm done for the questions for this session. You have given a very good idea about how digitalization primarily happens in supply chain, how to do it in the right way, including all the aspects. And thanks for your sharing your experience as well. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Maninder. It was a nice experience for me as well.